All right, so ready to dive into a world of power, scandal, and some seriously strong women. We're
Always.
talking about Henry VIII's wives, but not the, the version you learned in school.
Right.
You sent us some fascinating sources that go way beyond the whole divorce, beheaded, died thing
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
really uncover the real lives of these women. We're going behind the myths with some expert analysis from the not just the Tudors podcast.
Oh, great podcast.
Yeah, and exploring how Catherine of Aragon used art to wield power even before she became queen,
Hmm.
and taking a fresh look at Anne Boleyn.
It's amazing, really, how much these women accomplished in a world where their options were so limited.
No.
Especially when it came to, defying the king.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it, right?
Yeah.
These women were navigating a court where the stakes were like unbelievably high,
Yeah.
and one wrong move, I mean, you could lose everything,
Yeah.
even your head. It really makes you wonder how they managed to carve out their own, spaces of power and influence.
Well, Catherine of Aragon is a perfect example of that. We all know the story of her, being kind of pushed aside for Anne Boleyn. But what's fascinating is that she was a force to be reckoned with long before she ever even set foot in England.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. What made Catherine so remarkable before she even met Henry?
Well, she was incredibly well educated
Mm-hmm.
and politically savvy, thanks in part to her parents, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain, of course.
All right, yeah.
And get this, at the age of 16, she served as an ambassador for her father.
Wow. A female ambassador in the early 1500s. That's pretty groundbreaking.
Absolutely. It was unheard of in England at the time. It really reflects the spirit of the Renaissance, where some women were starting to have a greater voice in, intellectual and political spheres. And Catherine really embodied that.
So she wasn't just a princess waiting to be, married off.
Right.
She was already a player on the European stage.
Exactly. And her agency extended beyond politics. She was also a major patron of the arts. For instance, she commissioned one of the earliest known translations of an English chronicle into Spanish.
Yeah.
It shows how she was actively shaping cultural exchange between England and Spain.
Yeah, she was making her mark even then. You know what I find really interesting is how Catherine used art to project her power and status, even as queen.
Yes. We have these amazing portraits of her done by a miniaturist named Lucas Hornbout. They provide a glimpse into how she used her image very strategically.
What do you mean by strategically?
Well, in one portrait, she's wearing a very specific Spanish style of dress, and it's inscribed with the word wife. This was during the time when Henry was trying to annul their marriage to be with Anne Boleyn. So it's almost as if she's reminding Henry and the entire court, of her rightful place as his queen,
Yeah.
and the legitimacy of their union.
So it's not just a fashion statement, it's a political statement.
Precisely. These portraits are more than just pretty pictures, right?
Right.
They're acts of self-representation, carefully crafted to assert her authority and influence.
And speaking of influence, Catherine continued her patronage of the arts as queen.
Yeah.
She was instrumental in bringing the Florentine sculptor Pietro Torrigiano to England.
Yes.
Why was that so significant?
Torrigiano's arrival really, it did revolutionize English sculpture. He brought with him the techniques and styles of the Italian Renaissance, which had a huge impact on English art. His most famous work is probably the magnificent tomb of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York in Westminster Abbey.
Wow, I've seen pictures of that tomb, and it is incredibly ornate and detailed.
Exactly. And it was Catherine who made his presence in England possible. It shows how she was shaping the artistic landscape of the country.
Okay, so we've got Catherine, this powerful woman who was already making waves before she even became queen. Then we have Anne Boleyn entering the picture.
Yes.
And of course, she's often portrayed as the other woman who stole Henry away.
Right. And it's important to remember that history is often written by the victors, right?
Yeah.
In Anne's case, she was executed for treason.
Right.
So her story has been largely shaped by those who wanted to discredit her.
So how should we reconsider that traditional image of Anne Boleyn based on the information we have?
Well, we have letters that Anne wrote as a young woman where she actually expresses admiration for Catherine of Aragon.
Yeah.
and aspired to serve her loyally. And those famous love letters from Henry, they reveal that it was he who pursued her for over a year before she finally gave in.
So the story wasn't as simple as Henry falling head over heels for Anne and just casting Catherine aside.
Not at all. Anne wasn't this, manipulative seductress. In fact, she was known for her intelligence, her wit, and her stylishness. It seems those were her true allure, not some kind of, calculated scheming.
It's interesting how those qualities were often seen as threatening in women,
Right.
especially in a court like Henry's.
Yeah. And Anne was also a significant figure in the English Reformation.
Could you explain what that means for those who might not be familiar with that period of history?
Sure. The English Reformation was a period of huge religious upheaval in England. It led to the break from the Roman Catholic Church and the establishment of the Church of England with the king as its head. Anne was a genuine advocate for religious reform and was deeply influenced by Protestant ideas that were spreading across Europe.
It sounds like she was taking some serious risks by supporting these new religious ideas.
She was. She even brought banned books into England, which was incredibly dangerous at the time. It shows how strong her convictions were, and her reformist zeal had a lasting impact. Her daughter, Elizabeth I, would go on to establish the Church of England as we know it today.
Wow, that's quite a legacy.
Yeah.
But what about Anne's downfall? I mean, she was accused of some pretty serious crimes, right?
Yeah, this is where things get really murky. We have to remember the political context. Henry desperately wanted a male heir, and Anne had failed to produce one after giving birth to Elizabeth. Plus, there were powerful factions at court who opposed Anne and her reformist agenda.
So those accusations against her, adultery and even treason, could they have been fabricated?
That's certainly a possibility. We have one particularly interesting source that sheds some light on this. A poem sent as a dispatch from the French embassy in London, just weeks after Anne's execution.
A poem. What could a poem possibly tell us about a trial for treason?
Well, this poem basically presents the accusations against Anne as rumors spread by her enemies,
Okay.
particularly those who wanted to see her removed from power.
So it's like a contemporary take on the events, suggesting that there was more to the story than just the official charges.
Exactly. It's a primary source from someone who was actually there, witnessing the events unfold.
That's incredible. It really highlights how we have to be, critical of the historical record, especially when it comes to figures like Anne Boleyn, whose stories have been shaped by, those who sought to demonize them. It also makes you wonder what other historical narratives might be, hiding kind of similar complexities and power struggles.
Absolutely. It's all about peeling back the layers and trying to get as close to the truth as possible.
And we can't forget about the more outlandish accusations that were thrown at Anne, like witchcraft and giving birth to a deformed child. Were those based on anything real?
Not at all. Those rumors were spread by her enemies, often years after her death, to further tarnish her reputation and undermine the legitimacy of her daughter Elizabeth. There's no contemporary evidence to support any of it.
It's a reminder that even back then, people used misinformation and smear campaigns to discredit their rivals. So it seems like Anne Boleyn was more than just a pretty face who met a tragic end.
Right.
She was a woman of substance, a religious reformer, and a political player in her own right.
Right. And her story, like those of all of Henry's wives, is full of complexity and nuance. It's about time we move beyond the simplified narratives and recognize these women for the remarkable figures they truly were.
Speaking of moving beyond simplified narratives, let's talk about Anne of Cleves. She's often remembered as the ugly queen who Henry immediately rejected, right?
Yes, the infamous Flanders mare, right? But that label was based on one highly subjective account from a courtier who clearly wasn't a fan.
So the reality of Anne of Cleves is a bit different.
Oh, absolutely. Anne of Cleves was a product of her upbringing. She was raised in Germany in a more conservative environment than the English court. She was known for her practical skills, her piety, and her rather straightforward personality. She wasn't interested in all the courtly games or frivolous pursuits that Henry seemed to enjoy.
So she was basically the opposite of what Henry was looking for.
In some ways, yes. He was expecting someone more, glamorous and alluring, someone who would fit in, seamlessly with the Tudor court. But Anne was more down to earth. And her German upbringing gave her, a different perspective on marriage and the role of the queen.
It sounds like a clash of personalities and cultures.
Yeah.
But was it just her appearance that turned Henry off?
Well, that's the story that's been, perpetuated.
Right.
But there are other factors to consider. Henry was already in his late 40s. His health was declining, and he was probably feeling insecure about his own appearance, having, gained quite a bit of weight and suffering from a leg wound that never healed properly.
Yeah.
Anne's arrival may have simply highlighted his own anxieties.
Maybe it was more about Henry's issues than Anne's.
It's definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
Plus, we can't forget the political machinations that were always swirling around the Tudor court.
Yeah.
Anne's brother, Wilhelm, the Duke of Jülich-Klevsberg, was involved in some tricky diplomatic maneuvers that may have, soured the relationship between England and Cleves.
Could you elaborate on those maneuvers?
Sure. Wilhelm was trying to form alliances with other Protestant rulers in Europe, which made Henry nervous, because he was worried about provoking the Catholic powers of France and Spain.
Ah, I see.
So the political climate definitely played a role in Henry's decision to annul the marriage.
So poor Anne was kind of caught in the middle of all this political maneuvering.
Exactly. She was essentially a pawn in a larger game, a game she didn't even, fully understand. But here's the thing. Anne handled the situation with incredible grace and intelligence.
What do you mean? What did she do?
Well, she could have fought Henry's attempts to annul the marriage.
Right.
But instead, she agreed to a peaceful separation. This was a very smart move because it allowed her to secure her own, financial security and remain on good terms with Henry. He actually treated her quite well after the annulment, giving her properties and referring to her as his beloved sister.
Wow. So she kind of played the long game and came out on top.
You could say that. She even developed a close friendship with her stepdaughter, Mary, which would last for years.
Wow.
It speaks to Anne's resilience and her ability to adapt to an incredibly challenging and unexpected situation.
She definitely deserves more credit than she's usually given.
Yeah.
Instead of being remembered as the rejected queen,
Right.
she should be celebrated for her cleverness and her ability to thrive even after being cast aside by Henry.
I completely agree. Anne of Cleves is a reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, it's possible to find a path forward and create a life of your own.
Okay, so we've covered Catherine of Aragon, the powerful ambassador turned queen.
Yes.
Anne Boleyn, the intelligent and reform-minded woman caught in a web of political intrigue. And Anne of Cleves, who navigated a tricky situation with grace and secured her own independence. All of them, in their own way, challenged the limited roles that that society tried to impose on them.
And what's really striking is how these women, despite their very different personalities and experiences, all managed to leave their mark on history.
It makes you realize that there's so much more to their stories than the simplified versions we've often been told.
Yeah.
But we're just getting started. Stick with us as we dive into the lives of Henry's other wives, Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr, in Part 2.
If you thought the first three wives were fascinating, wait until you hear about these two. Their stories offer even more insights into the complexities of power, love, and survival in the Tudor court.
Stay tuned.
Yes. So let's move on to Catherine Howard. She is often portrayed as the naive teenager who caught Henry's eye,
Right.
but then made some reckless choices that led to her downfall.
Yeah, I remember learning about her in school
Yeah.
and getting the impression that she was a bit of a party girl who wasn't really cut out for the pressures of court life.
Right. And while there's some truth to that, her story is far more complicated.
Okay.
And frankly, quite tragic. Catherine came from a powerful family, the Howards, but she had a difficult childhood. She lost her mother at a young age. And was sent to live with her grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk.
Okay.
And the Duchess's household was pretty chaotic, with lots of servants and young people coming and going.
Yeah.
And Catherine didn't receive the kind of, education and guidance that someone in her position really needed.
So she was kind of thrown into the deep end of the Tudor court without the proper preparation.
Exactly. And she was still very young, probably around 17 or 18,
Yeah.
when she married Henry. And he was 49.
Okay.
And completely smitten with her. He showered her with gifts, restored her family's fortunes, and even composed a love song for her.
It sounds like a fairy tale romance, at least at first.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But But beneath the surface, there were problems brewing. Catherine was unprepared for the scrutiny and the restrictions that came with being queen. Remember, this was a time when women, especially queens, were expected to be completely subservient to their husbands. They had very little personal freedom.
And then there were those relationships from Catherine's past that came back to haunt her, right?
Unfortunately, yes. There were rumors of affairs, and some of her past indiscretions were used against her by her enemies at court.
I remember reading about a man named Francis Derham, who was supposedly involved with Catherine before she married Henry.
That's right. Derham was a secretary in the Dowager Duchess's household,
Mm-hmm.
and there's evidence to suggest that they had a romantic relationship.
Hmm.
And after Catherine became queen, Derham was given a position at court.
Oh.
This was a huge mistake because it put them back in close proximity,
Hmm.
and rumors started to spread.
It's kind of crazy to think that something that happened, before she was even queen could lead to such serious consequences.
Well, that's the Tudor court for you. It was a dangerous place, especially for women.
Right.
Even the slightest hint of scandal could be exploited for political gain. And in Catherine's case, there were powerful factions at court who wanted to see her removed from power.
So what happened? Was she actually guilty of the charges against her?
The evidence is ambiguous.
Yeah.
There were definitely relationships in Catherine's past that were deemed inappropriate, but
Yeah.
but whether she continued those relationships after becoming queen is debatable.
What about Thomas Culpeper?
Yes.
He was one of Henry's courtiers who was also implicated in the scandal, right?
Yes, Culpeper was a handsome and ambitious young man who caught Catherine's eye, and there are letters between them that suggest a romantic connection,
Yeah.
but whether their relationship was ever consummated is unclear.
This is where, having those multiple perspectives from our sources is so helpful.
Yes.
It's not about trying to, you know, prove Catherine's innocence or guilt,
Right.
but rather, understanding the complexities of the situation.
Exactly. We have to consider the possibility that some of the accusations were exaggerated or even fabricated by those who wanted her out of the picture. Remember, the Howards were a powerful family,
Yeah.
and their rivals at court would have been eager to bring them down.
It sounds like a dangerous game of whispers and intrigue.
It absolutely was, and it's crucial to remember that even if Catherine had been involved in affairs, adultery on the part of a queen was not technically considered treason at the time.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
So how did they even charge her with treason?
And they had to pass a special law just for Catherine. The Act of Attainder of 1542 declared that it was treason for a queen consort to commit adultery.
Yeah.
This shows how determined Henry and his advisors were to get rid of her.
Mm-hmm.
There was clearly a political motive at play.
So it seems like poor Catherine was essentially a victim of circumstance.
Mhm.
She made some mistakes, sure, but she was ultimately punished for political reasons.
That's a very likely interpretation, and it's a cautionary tale about the dangers of courtly life and the precarious position of women in Tudor society.
Yeah.
Catherine's story also, reminds us that history is rarely as simple as it seems.
Yeah.
We have to dig deeper and look beyond the surface to understand the motivations and the power dynamics that shaped these events.
It's also a reminder that the victors write history.
Right.
And we have to be careful not to accept their version of events uncritically.
Exactly. Now, shall we move on to Henry's sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr?
Yes, Les. After all that drama with Catherine Howard, it seems like Henry would have been hesitant to marry again.
Yeah.
But he did, and this time he chose Catherine Parr, a woman who was twice widowed and known for her intelligence and her strong religious convictions.
Catherine Parr is a fascinating figure. She's often seen as the safe choice,
Right.
the caretaker for the aging and ailing Henry.
I
But she was anything but a pushover.
mean, the fact that she outlived Henry, I mean, it says something about her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of the Tudor court.
Right. Catherine was no fool. She was very intelligent and well educated. She had already been married twice
Okay.
to Edward Burrough and John Neville, Lord Latimer. So she She had experience dealing with powerful men. She knew how to play the game, but she also used her position to advance causes she cared about. She was a devout Protestant and a strong advocate for religious reform.
So she wasn't content to just, sit back and be a decorative queen.
Right.
She actually wanted to make a difference.
Exactly. And guess what? She was also an author.
A queen who wrote books. That's pretty impressive for the time.
It was groundbreaking. Her book Lamentations of a Sinner was one of the first books published by an English queen. It's a deeply personal work that explores her religious beliefs and her struggles with sin and redemption, and it was quite controversial at the time because it expressed Protestant views that were at odds with Henry's own beliefs.
But she wasn't just, concerned with courtly affairs.
Right.
She was engaging with intellectual and spiritual matters.
Yes.
And she was willing to take risks to express her beliefs.
Yes, absolutely. And she did this at great personal risk. Remember, Henry was still the head of the Church of England.
Right.
Any deviation from his views on religion could have been dangerous.
So she was pretty courageous to write and publish something that might have been seen as heretical.
She was definitely putting herself out there. But Catherine was also skilled at managing Henry's volatile temper. She knew when to push him and when to back down. For example, there was a time when Henry became suspicious of her Protestant leanings. He even authorized her arrest.
Wow.
But Catherine managed to talk her way out of it.
Oh.
She appealed to his ego, reminding him of her love and submission.
Wow. She was walking a tightrope for sure.
Yeah.
But she managed to survive. And not only survive, but thrive. I read that she had a significant influence on Henry's children, particularly Elizabeth, who she helped educate.
That's right. Catherine was a strong advocate for education, especially for women. She believed that women should be able to read and write and think for themselves. She even arranged for Elizabeth and her half-sister Mary to have access to the same tutors as their brother Edward.
So Catherine Parr was more than just, Henry's final wife.
Right.
She was a woman of intellect, faith, and influence.
Yeah.
She used her position to promote literacy, religious reform, and education. She was a true trailblazer.
She was indeed, and her story reminds us that power can take many forms.
Yeah.
It's not always about brute force or political maneuvering. Sometimes it's about using your intelligence, your voice, and your platform to make a difference.
Okay, so we've covered 4 of Henry VIII's 6 wives in detail.
Yes.
Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Anne of Cleves, and Catherine Parr.
And I think what's most important is that we've moved beyond the simplified narrative. We've seen these women as individuals with their own ambitions, their own struggles, and their own legacies.
We've seen them as more than just, the wives of a king.
Exactly.
They were queens, ambassadors, reformers, artists, and authors. They were women who made their mark on history, even in a world dominated by men.
And their stories continue to resonate with us today because they remind us that even in the face of adversity, women have always found ways to wield power, to make their voices heard, and to shape the world around them.
I think one of the things that strikes me most about these women is their resilience.
Yes.
They faced incredible challenges, but they never gave up. Yeah. They found ways to adapt, to survive, and even to thrive.
I agree. They were true survivors.
And they were all so different from each other. Catherine of Aragon was a strong and determined woman who fought for her rights.
Yeah.
Anne Boleyn was intelligent and ambitious, and she played a key role in the English Reformation. Anne of Cleves was pragmatic and resourceful, and she managed to secure her own independence.
Right.
And Catherine Parr was a woman of faith and intellect who used her position to promote education and religious reform.
It's amazing to think that one man could have been married to such a diverse group of women.
It really is, and it's a reminder that there's always more to the story than meets the eye. We have to be willing to dig deeper, to challenge the traditional narratives, and to see these women as the complex and multifaceted individuals they truly were.
Well said.
And on that note, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll wrap up our discussion of Henry VIII's wives with a closer look at Catherine Parr's legacy.
Yes.
And the lasting impact of these remarkable women. All right, so we're back and ready to finish our deep dive into the lives of Henry VIII's wives. Before the break, we were talking about Catherine Parr's intelligence and her influence on religious reform and education.
Yeah. And it's interesting how her story connects to something we talked about earlier, the power of portraiture.
Yeah.
It seems Catherine Parr was quite the trendsetter when it came to how she wanted to be portrayed.
I I remember seeing a portrait of her where she's wearing this like incredible gown and tons of jewelry. She looks very regal.
That's the one. She commissioned this incredible full-length portrait, the
Mm.
the first of its kind for an English queen. It was a real statement piece asserting her authority and her place in history.
But I also read somewhere that her image got kind of mixed up with another historical fessler, Lady Jane Grey.
Yes.
How did that happen?
It's a fascinating example of how, historical memory can be fluid and how easily images can be reinterpreted over time. After Catherine's death, there wasn't anyone, actively promoting her image or legacy, unlike some of the other queens.
Right.
And Lady Jane Grey, who was, briefly queen after Henry's son, Edward, died, became a bit of a Protestant martyr figure.
Mm.
So artists looking for a suitable image for Jane kind of latched onto existing portraits of Catherine.
So there are portraits out there that people thought were of Lady Jane Grey, but they were actually Catherine Parr.
Exactly. It took some serious historical detective work to disentangle their iconography. There's this famous full-length portrait in the National Portrait Gallery that was long thought to be Jane Grey, but the jewelry she's wearing, clearly identifies her as Catherine Parr.
That's wild. It's like a historical game of who wore it better.
Huh? But it's also a reminder that we have to be, careful when interpreting historical portraits.
Right.
They're not always what they seem.
Okay, before we wrap up, I have to ask about Catherine Parr's love life.
Yes.
I read that she had a real love story after Henry died.
She did. It's easy to forget that these were real people with real emotions.
Yeah.
Catherine fell in love with Thomas Seymour, who was actually the brother of Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife.
Wait a minute. So she had her eye on him while she was married to Henry. That's bold.
Well, it seems they had a connection, but nothing happened until after Henry's death.
Okay.
Catherine and Thomas married quickly, and it caused quite a scandal because she didn't even wait the customary mourning period.
I guess after being married to Henry, she wasn't about to let anyone dictate her love life anymore.
You can't really blame her, can you? But sadly, the marriage was short-lived. Catherine died tragically in childbirth just a few years later. It's a reminder that even amidst the power struggles and the courtly intrigue, these were people who experienced, love, loss, and the fragility of life.
It definitely adds another layer of depth and humanity to these stories.
Yeah.
Well, we've delved into the lives of these incredible women, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, and of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. We've seen their triumphs, their tragedies, their hidden talents, and their lasting legacies.
And I think what's most important is that we've challenged those oversimplified narratives that have often reduced these women to mere footnotes in history. They were so much more than just wives of a king.
Exactly. They were queens, ambassadors, reformers, artists, mothers, authors. They were women who navigated a world of power and intrigue. And their stories, they continue to fascinate and inspire us today.
Their stories remind us that even in the face of adversity, women have always found ways to wield power, to make their voices heard, and to shape the world around them.
Absolutely. And I think we can all learn something from their courage, their resilience, and their determination to make their own mark on the world.
If this deep dive has sparked your curiosity about the hidden stories and the remarkable figures from history, you're in the right place.
We have tons of other episodes exploring fascinating corners of the past, uncovering the connections and the surprises that make history, come alive.
So hit that subscribe button and join us on the next adventure. Who knows what fascinating figures we'll uncover next?